Hello developers, welcome back to our React tutorial series. Today we are going to explore the class component lifecycle in React, a fundamental concept that every React developer should understand. Now, I know it sounds a bit technical, but don't worry, we are going to break it down into simple terms so everyone can understand. If you are new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and press notification bell so you never miss our upcoming videos. Now let's get started. So, what exactly do we mean when we talk about React class component lifecycle? Well, imagine it as the journey a React component takes from its creation to its removal. In simple terms, it's a lifecycle event that occurs as your React component is born, updates, and eventually bids farewell. This journey is divided into three main phases: mounting, updating, and unmounting. Each phase serves a specific purpose and has associated methods that allow us to hook into the component's behavior. Let's start with the mounting phase. This is like the birth of our component, and when a component is created and inserted into the DOM for the first time. In the previous videos, we have already created a counter class component. This is a simple counter example where we have a counter state and that we have displayed right here, and on click this button it increments this count. In the mounting phase we have three key methods, and the journey begins with the constructor. This method is where we set up initial state and binding event handlers. Next, our mounting journey is the renderer method. This is where the actual UI of our component is defined. Finally, we reach the last stop in mounting, the componentDidMount method. Let's create this. Here, componentDidMount. This is called once our component has been rendered to the DOM. It is the great place to perform actions that requires the component to be fully initialized, like fetching data or setting up subscriptions. So let's see all of these in action. So first, in the constructor, let's console log constructor component is being constructed. Next, in the renderer method, let's console log renderer UI is being rendered. Now in the final stage, componentDidMount, let's console log componentDidMount. Component is now mounted. Now let's take a look at the browser, and in the browser we have this item list component that we have implemented in the last video. So let's go back to editor, and in the app.jsx let's clean all of these. So let's remove all these imports, and also let's remove these commented code. And now here I'm going to import from the components directory counter class component. Next, in the JSX, let's add counter class component tag. Now let's take a look at the browser, and in the inspect tool console we get these console logs. Let's refresh. As this component is mounted, it has logged in the console log. First is the constructor. The mounting phase starts from the constructor, then renderer, and then componentDidMount. To make it more simple, let's add a button to toggle display for this component. So let's go to the editor, and in the app.jsx, in this app component, first let's import from the React use state, and next in this app function const in square brackets, let's say display, and set display is equal to use state, and initially it is false. Next here I'll add this in curly braces. If display is true, then show this counter class component. Next let's add a button. In this button we have a label text. If display, then we will say hide, otherwise we will say display. So if display is true, then show hide text, otherwise show display text. And on click this button, on click, here I will use arrow function, and in this arrow function I'll call set display, this one, and here I'll say this display. So if it is true, then it is going to set it false, and if display is false, then it is going to set display true. Now let's go to browser, refresh. Right now the component is not visible, and on click this display button, and then we get the counter component, and here text is hide. Click on hide, the component is removed from the browser. Now refresh again. Right now the component is not visible, and in the console we do not have any message. As I click this display button, immediately you can see we have console log. First, in the counter class component, constructor method was called. So here we get this console log from the constructor method. And after that, we get the console log from the renderer method. The renderer method has displayed this UI. After component is rendered in the browser, componentDidMount method is called, and we get the console log from this method. As I have explained, this constructor method is to initialize state or bind event handlers, and the renderer is responsible for UI rendering. But what is the role of this componentDidMount? Because this method is called once when the component is rendered in the DOM, so it is the best place to fetch data from the API. Now let's suppose we want to change the title of this page when the component is rendered. So here let's say document.title is equal to count this.state.count. So when the component will be rendered, it will call this componentDidMount method, and it is going to change the document title and the value of count state. Let's see. So refresh. Right now we have title feed plus react. Now as I click this display button, you can see the title has been changed, count 0. Now on click +1, it increments the count by 1, and I want to update this title right here also. That we can do in the next phase of class component lifecycle, that is updating phase. Updating phase kicks off with the shouldComponentUpdate method. Let's create this shouldComponentUpdate, and this method accepts two arguments. First, next props, next state. This method decides whether the component should update or not. By default, it returns true, meaning the component will update, but we can optimize the performance by customizing this method to check if the new props or new state are different from the current ones. Don't worry about these errors. These errors are because the variables are defined but never used. Now let's suppose from here if I return false. Now let's go back to browser, refresh, click this display button to show the counter, and here if I click this +1, you can see the count is not updating. Now if I return true and check this again, now you can see it is updating. With the help of this function, it will be straightforward to check when we have to render the components and when we do not have to generate the features. This function provides us with a better way to manage component performance by allowing us to check conditions to see if rendering is necessary for specific requirements. Next stage of updating phase is the renderer method. We saw this in the mounting phase also, but during updates it plays a crucial role. The renderer method creates the updated UI based on the new props and state. It is where the component gets its fresh look. In this example, the renderer method updates the UI based on the new count value. Let's see this in the browser. Refresh, display this counter component. Now let's clear this console log. Now as I click on this +1, you can see it has logged this text from the renderer method. So every time when state or props value changes, it calls renderer method to update the UI. And now the final stage of updating phase is the componentDidUpdate method. Let's create this. So componentDidUpdate. This method also going to accept two arguments. First, previous props and previous state. This method is called after the component updates in the DOM. It is the perfect place for actions that need to happen after the update, like fetching additional data or interacting with the DOM. Let's console log in this method. In the backtick, let's say prev count is dollar in the curly braces prev state dot count, and then we have next count, that is this dot state dot count. So let's see this in the browser. Refresh, display component and clear this all. Next on press this +1 button. First it logged this text from the renderer method, and then it is logged from the componentDidUpdate method. Previous count is 0 and the next count is 1. +1. Again first it rendered this from the renderer method, and previous count is 1 and next count is 2. It is going to call componentDidUpdate method every time when the value of count is changed. So in this method we can update the document title here. So here we can say, let's copy this and paste this here. Let's go to browser, refresh, display the component, and on click this +1, immediately you can see count 1 is updated in both places, right here in the document title and here also. +1, now count is 2, and here also count is 2. So the updating phase is all about making our component stay relevant and up to date. This shouldComponentUpdate method decides if the update is necessary, then renderer creates the updated look, and the componentDidUpdate method performs the actions after the update. And the last phase of class component lifecycle is the componentWillUnmount method. Let's create this. So componentWillUnmount. This componentWillUnmount method is like our component saying, I'm leaving, but let's tidy up before I go. Here let's console log componentWillUnmount and component being removed. Now let's go back to browser, refresh, first display the component. Now clear this. As I hide this component, immediately you can see this text is logged from the componentWillUnmount method. So this method is the place for clean up anything before the component disappear. For example, the component is removed from the DOM, but in the document title you can see it is still we have title count 0. We do not want that. Instead it should be the original title. So for that, in the componentDidMount. Here, before setting this document title, we will store the original document title in another variable. So this dot original title is equal to document dot title, like this. First we store the original document title in this original title variable, and then we have updated the document title with the count and the count value. Now when component is going to remove from the DOM, then here I will update document dot title is equal to this dot original title, like this. Now let's go back to browser, refresh. The original title is Wheat plus React. Now let's display the counter component. Now the document title is changed, count 0 plus 1. Now the value is count 2. Now as I hide this counter component, we get the original title Wheat plus React. Let's see one more example for componentWillUnmount. So let's say we want to display mouse position. So here in the constructor, let's say in the state we have x 0 and y 0. Now in the componentDidMount, here we want to bind window dot add event listener on mouse over this dot log mouse position. Now let's create this method. So log mouse position is equal to arrow function, and it is going to accept event, and here I'll say this dot set state in the curly braces x is event dot client x and y is equal to event dot client y. Next in the renderer method, here let's display in the paragraph tag x is this dot state x and y position is this dot state dot y. Now let's get to browser, refresh, display counter component, and you can see on mouse over here we get these values. Let's remove all these console logs for better understanding. Next in this method, let's console log this object. Now go back to browser, refresh, display the counter component. Now on mouse over, we are getting logs in the console. Now as I hide this component and clear this log, but we are still getting console log, it can cause various issues in app. So when the component is removed from the DOM, then it should also remove this event listener. So for that, let's copy this and paste that here in the componentWillUnmount, and here I'll say window dot remove event listener, like this. Now let's go back to browser, refresh, display the counter class component, and here we getting the mouse position logs in the console. Let's hide this, clear this console. Now we are not getting any mouse position logs in the console. Similarly, let's say we have set interval function that calls this dot increment every second. Now if we go to browser, refresh, here you can see the count increment. Now in the componentWillUnmount, here we can clear up this set interval to avoid any memory leaks. For that, first let's store this in the any variable. Let's say this dot timer id, and now in the componentWillUnmount, here we can call clear interval and then pass this dot timer id, like this. Here we clear up the interval that updates the count every second. It ensures that our component doesn't keep running in the background using up the resources when we are not looking at it. But why this is so important? Well, cleaning up resources is crucial to prevent memory leaks and ensure our application runs smoothly. And there you have it, the simple breakdown of the class component lifecycle in React. They allow us to hook into different phases like initializing state, rendering UI, and cleanup. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and share it with your fellow developers. If you have any questions or topic you would like us to cover, let us know in the comments below. Until next time, happy coding.